And just to remind you that the panel session is going to be recorded, but if you want to ask questions and you don't want to unmute or put your video on, please put it in the chat function, or put it in the chat function and come on video afterwards, by all means. We want to use this opportunity to explore some of the things that you've heard, but also maybe there's some things that you wanted to say that you didn't have the opportunity to in the breakout groups. I mean, if I come back to what we started with, the conference is about embracing diversity, but it was about what is this intersectionality? How does it affect us as individuals? And then how do we respond to that when we see how intersectionality affects others as well? So we have the panel in front of us. There's quite a number of people here. And I don't know whether anybody would like to start us off by starting to think about, well, how does that intersectionality affect us, but how does it affect other people? So that there's two questions there, really. Let's start with how it affects us. Is there something specific that we've really gained from today that we'd like to explore a bit more? I certainly have been challenged by thinking about how intersectionality affects me, in the sense that I was looking at how my gender and my sexuality combine and are also affected. And if we talk about what was talked about in Savi's talk, where we talked about no, it was Ruby's talk, I apologize, where we talked about the male dominance. That's really kind of what we talked a lot about in our group, and it is quite an important element. So as a kind of question to throw out to you, how does that intersectionality affect us as individuals?
Yeah, I was kind of hesitant to say anything first as a man in response to that question, but I think one of the things that came out of our group was a comment about listening, and and another one of the other comments that came out was that kind of being aware of privilege. It's not an on or off switch. It's a developing theme. I increasingly become aware of my privilege and privileges, and I think there are times when it's time for me to just shut up and listen. I was party to a conversation with and it was an accidental conversation between two women recently who were talking about their experiences as women in a society in which men feel so much privilege and entitlement. And I was shocked and horrified at some of the stuff that they were talking about. I could also find parallels in my own experience as a gay man, but for most of the conversation, I just shut up and listened. So I'm going to shut up and listen.
Sue, you've got your hand up. Did you want to respond to that? You had something else to say.
No, I actually wanted to say that I was waiting for somebody, hopefully a man, to be the first person to speak. Because in our group, one of the things we were saying is it's always the women that have to sort out the oppression of the women. And it's kind of like it's that thought of we're the ones that have to find the solution for you not oppressing us. But I don't mean you, obviously, Gerard. I'm just saying that this is the idea is that it's the men that are looking to the women to find the solution for the men stopping doing what they're doing. And it seems a little bit like, I can get with that it's frustrating to constantly have to be battling with what we see as common sense.
I think I'll have a go as well. Thank you so much, Sue, and you're very right in that sense as well, because it's the same as well, that it is not the responsibility of gay people to explain to homophobic people why we're gay. It is not the responsibility of women to explain to men. It is not the responsibility of Black people to explain to white people why I'm Black. You understand me? And again, you know, it just goes on and on. Some of the things that I've raised in our conversation is that we need to create room for everybody and stay out of the way. And I think that when Ruby was talking about patriarchy, I think that it resonates because too often men don't give room to women. And of course, heterosexual women also live and are guided under the rubrics of patriarchy. So that is why sometimes, we find that heterosexual women in particular do not understand that they need to give room for queer women to actually be able to be in that space too. Just like Gerard, I'm also aware of my privileges. I shared in our group that, I went to a meeting whilst I was in London, and someone, greeted me and said, "Oh, are you also seeking asylum?" I just said to myself, how come this boy that was born in Islington could be seeking asylum in his own country? And it just dawned on me later on that there was somebody else who had been in the meeting ahead of me who was from Uganda, seeking asylum, and I shared their own stories. So I said, oh, so the next Black person that comes in is also seeking asylum. How ironic is that? But I'm also mindful of my own privileges as someone who is British and of Nigerian heritage as well. So I don't say to people, I understand what people going through asylum are going through, because I don't. I was born with that privilege of being British. So I don't always assume or pretend that I understand what people are going through. I just stand in solidarity, with people where they are at. Yeah.
Thank you, Jide. Anne, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yes. Sorry, my technical gremlins seem to be practically forming a ring around and dancing on my computer. It's just one of those things. If it can go wrong technically, it is going wrong around here. But what I want to say is that the way, if people recognize oppression for themselves, it's one thing, because if you recognize that you are being oppressed, you have all sorts of options. But if you're seeing other people oppressed, it is too easy, especially for those with power, to simply ignore it, to simply say that's someone else's problem, or even worse, to think, well, if I say something, am I going to make the problem worse? Whereas we should be looking at ways that we can say, if you're seeing oppression and you don't do anything about it, you've got no excuse. We should be seeing it as a much more Christian imperative to speak up when we see oppression, because that is the way, as Jide was saying, to stand with those who are oppressed. We can't just afford to ignore it, whether it affects us personally or not.
It's difficult though, isn't it, Anne, to actually stand up to oppression, because it sometimes we're not even aware we're being oppressed. We're just aware that something doesn't feel right. But yes, I can see Ruby's got Savi's got your hand up.
Yes, I think that with regard to intersectionality, very often we think of it in terms of overlapping oppressions, and that's important. But I think there's also an area around intersecting struggles and ways in which we can learn from one another in terms of striving to create a more just and inclusive church and world. And I think that sometimes those opportunities are missed. Firstly, if we focus simply on what goes wrong without looking at the strides that have been made, at the attempts that have been successful sometimes in creating spaces that are more welcoming, more equal, in looking towards what we might regard as the realm or commonwealth of God on earth. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity for mutual learning. For instance, I think that there is a lot going on around the theologies from the South and among people of colour or people of global majority heritage in the West that might overlap with some of the thinking going on in the LGBTQIA+ circles, even setting aside that by those of us who are both. But sometimes those links don't get made because there's a kind of assumption that each group ought to be working in a bit of a silo. except for when we're looking together at sort of joint oppressions. Whereas I think there's a lot also that's creative, a lot around creating cultures that are more forward-looking in a way, and which link with broader concern for the planet and for one another.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it picks up with a couple of things we've been talking about. It's about making yourself aware of what's out there, so that you are actually aware of what other people are actually doing and how they are being affected and how they are changing the narratives for themselves. Sue, yeah, I see you've got your hand up.
I forgot our group came up with 3 questions for Savi, actually, so if I could just sort of throw them out. One was because we were recognizing the amount and level of work that you have done. People were sort of saying, well, how do you cope, was the first question. The second one was, what do you do when you feel vulnerable? How do you cope with keeping on going? And the third one, and I think we were all interested in the answer to this one, do you ever want to hit someone?
Well, I won't take up a lot of time in responding, and I think Ruby may have some overlapping experiences as well as quite a lot of us in terms of coping sometimes with quite a lot. I think in some ways I've been luckier than many, so I've also come across a lot of supportive people and spaces that are positive, and I think part of that was in terms of my family, and family, of course, can encompass quite a wide range of people, but I think that's been very important to me throughout my life, and people's willingness maybe to move forward and meet me where I am and question what they might have taken for granted. And I think I've been blessed by being surrounded by people who maybe have been willing to stray a bit outside their comfort zone. Yes, sometimes things feel overwhelming and I haven't got the answer to that. Sometimes it's just retreating, switching off, doing something completely different, reading a detective or sci-fi novel, going for a walk in the car, in sort of the urban countryside, so to speak, some of the green spaces that there are even in built-up areas, finding ways to nurture myself, spending time with friends. Yes, I think I'm not generally inclined to hit people, but I might gaze at objects in my flat that are quite inoffensive, but with a sort of malevolent. No, I think that it can get very frustrating. So it's finding ways of letting off steam. But then I think we all experience that sometimes, and it's also finding those moments of joy in the midst of all of that. So others probably have their own coping strategies.
Yeah, I think probably a metaphorical one to kill people rather than an actual. I know sometimes we were talking in our group, and some people would like to poke people in the eye, just to get their attention, say, stop it. So yeah. Ruby, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really, thank you very much for all the sharing that you've done. It's been really fascinating to hear your points of view and the observations you've made. One of the things I wanted to say was my motivation for what I wrote was really based on something that I've been doing, which is I've been writing a chapter for a book on theologians of color, LGBT queer theologians of color. And so the people from all around the world being asked to write a chapter because we had some kind of leadership roles. And it was really interesting that I was the only one who wanted to look at us as a community and the problems that we face, that we have, that sometimes we don't want to address. Everybody else was writing about the external, the church, society, communities, people who challenge us as a community and oppress us. And I thought, that's true, that's there. But there's something we somehow are uncomfortable about addressing, which is our own communities and how we marginalize, how we oppress, how we make us quiet, make the other quiet. So that's what I wanted to look at. And I have to tell you, when we did our draft and we all met up, unfortunately, I had to do it virtually. I couldn't go to America, but it was like there was this stony silence when my chapter was read. Because it's an uncomfortable thing, isn't it? To be having to address the fact that maybe we hold some faults in us in terms of our supposed position of being fair and equal and equitable and all of those things. It's a discomfort, but nevertheless, it's something that needs to be addressed. So for me, it's always talking about the many years that I've been doing this, the many different leadership roles I've held locally, nationally, and globally, that women are involved, but they're always in the periphery. They're never given those opportunities for leadership roles, not deliberately. I don't think deliberately by men, but generally it's the way it's been done. So those positive messages, those little kind of banners, of words you can use that actually say, you're welcome, you have a place here. I think we need to look at the language we use, the way we communicate, and also, most importantly, the way we behave. Too often people say, yeah, we're equal, we're welcome, we're all of that. But if you ask people to do an audit about their organization and then reflect it as what society is, there's a huge disconnect. And I think we need to look at what's not in the room, what's not within us as organizations, and then say, are we really that welcoming? Are we really that accessible? Are we really that equal? And it's challenging, it's difficult, sometimes painful to have to say, okay, that's right, we're not doing this right, and it's now going to be difficult because we haven't got the money, the resources, whatever, to make those changes happen. But at least if there's an acknowledgement within each of our communities that, yeah, there is something missing, there's something here, somebody not here at the table with us, then at least that's one step forward. The difficulty, without doubt, is creating the resources, the energy and the time to make those changes happen. And for me, it's always been an issue. Whichever organization I've been in, I mentioned in my talk, people are welcoming, but it's up to a point where you start saying, okay, we've got to do this. That's when the resistance comes in, because now you're creating a problem for me. You're creating a problem for us as an organization to grow, to be accepting, to be welcoming, and to be truly inclusive. It's the hardest challenge, but it's what we need to do. Anyway, I'll shut up now, sorry.
No, I think what you're talking about is absolutely right. I noticed that Kieran's put in the chat about the inclusive church, talk about a radical welcome, what radical welcome means. Because we say all are welcome. I know from my own experience, people say everybody's welcome here until they find out that you have some part of your identity they're not comfortable with, whether gay or woman or whatever it is, or Black. There are times when people say all are welcome, but they don't actually mean that. So I suppose the question will be, how do we help people see that need for a radical welcome that is not simply saying, yes, you're all welcome here, but not necessarily understanding what that means? I'm up to you, Ruby, or is anybody else would like to come in and share something that you think would be helpful? Savi?
Okay, I'll get the ball rolling. I think part of it is understanding and accepting that it's actually quite challenging. There will be people, for instance, in Victorian churches with very uncomfortable pews who find the idea of removing those very difficult. But at the same time, there will be people who find actually sitting in them very difficult as well. And speaking as someone who's hearing impaired, there may be all kinds of settings which maybe quite challenging to get around, but where at least thinking about the issues can show some willingness to be welcoming to all. And again, it's complicated because it's also important that churches are welcoming places to young children, but not all of us, maybe some people may find it difficult to follow services if young children are running around. So it's thinking about some of those different dimensions, creating space where we can talk about those things, maybe helping people to feel less defensive, recognizing that sometimes for people who have been oppressed, they find a space that feels very much them, that culturally fits them very like a glove, and then thinking about anything else. For instance, do worship styles make it harder maybe for some people from different cultures fully to get involved? Can be difficult, and it can be hard again because there can be such differences in what draws people in, what helps to give people a sense of the holy as well as a sense of fellowship. So maybe creating some of that space to think about those questions, creating spaces again where people are perhaps less afraid of being challenged. It's not about saying that people are bad or whatever, but when people do come up with, for instance, broad generalizations, like the one that assumes that people in 2/3 of the world, people in the South, are invariably from countries that are lagging far behind in LGBTQIA+ inclusivity, and so it's a matter of maybe catching up with the West, and that's all that has to happen. That being willing to be challenged on that and recognizing it's not a personal attack, but maybe that just doesn't fit the reality for some of us, or the historical record, and creating that awareness that there may be people with other perspectives that offer something positive, even if it may be hard to hear at first, and maybe none of us particularly want to know that we've got things wrong, but all of us do sometimes.
Gail, would you like to come in? We've got a few minutes left if you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, when we were doing our mission statement that said seeking to be a safe place where all are included and belonged, somebody questioned that. One of the elders questioned, well, why are we seeking? Why are we not that? And it was that the reason seeking had been put in there is that acknowledgement that we don't always get it right, but it is that it's what you're seeking to be. And I think if you acknowledge that you are getting it wrong, then you want to do things to resolve that and to be more welcoming. So I think we should all seek to be, rather than say, oh yeah, we've got it all sorted, because I don't think any church has really got it all sorted.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And the fact that you're saying we got to seek it rather than we arrived is a very good point, actually. Ruby, we've got a minute. If you've got something that you'd like to just add towards the end.
Yeah, just in answer to your question, how do we go about, what do we do? I think it's nothing that's going to happen overnight, but I think if an attempt is made, everyone, and I've noticed the Open Table document on All Are Welcome, I think everyone can have really fantastic, positive statements that can go out. But if those aren't seen as in action, creating diversity and inclusivity, then there's a problem. And it doesn't happen overnight. One of the things, by the way, you still call me chair of a global network of Rainbow Catholics. I am that for another week. There's a new co-chair coming in next week. But the global network, what we did was, I said, where are the women? We have all these member groups from around the world, and I don't know how many women are involved in these groups. Please, can we do a survey? Can we find out exactly how many women are there, and then find out why they're not talking to us? They are out there, but we don't know who they are. So that's one thing you could delegate. You could delegate one person who's equality officer, outreach, whatever, to go out and talk to people to find out why they are not participating within the organization. But most importantly, participating in leadership roles. That's for me where the interest lies. Important to welcome people, important to reach out to them, to address their needs. But if they're still there and we're doing for them rather than they're engaged with us actively, then I think there's something missing. So it takes a long time. We've set up the Women's Committee, we've set up surveys, we've done research, and it's going to be an ongoing project. And now we have an equalities diversity officer whose sole job is to reach out and to create that even playing field for everybody.
Fantastic. Jide, you'll have to be the last question. So
yeah, I think I'll be very quick then, because I think in terms of moving forward, and you know, there was something that I shared in a group, I called it Jide's 4 O's. And one other thing is that we need to be better organized if we're going to, you know, counter all the nuances from the opposition, so to say, because, you know, the conservative Christians throw a lot of money behind their homophobic abuses. We need to occupy places. You know, I said this, that when I became an ordained priest in the Church of England, I felt that I was occupying, not I felt, I believe I'm occupying a place to provide pastoral care that is culturally appropriate and traditionally sensitive. And the other thing is we need to take ownership of our own ministry and our own well-being and our welfare and our own theology. And finally, we need to overtake. We need to overtake so that we can support the people that need support. So I wanted to share that. And I think the hashtag modern welcome is a good one. And so when you see a ministry or a church that says all are welcome, don't just accept it. You know, you need to ensure that they are a space that is more than welcome. That is what I want to share. Thank you.
Yeah, a lovely way to end our panel discussion. So thank you, Jide, and thanks to everybody who's been on the panel and everybody who's contributed. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I've really enjoyed that.